Alright, hello there, GFN here, and today we'll be doing a tier list of all 40 episodes of Gravity Falls. So this is going to be a bit of a heavily opinionated poll, ranking on Tier Maker, so expect that, and yeah, let's just get started with it. Fun fact, I made this tier list a couple of years back on Tier Maker, so yeah. And yeah, let's see. Okay, let's start in order. So it's gonna be the usual. S tier is the best, and F tier is the worst. And let's be honest. I think every episode of Gravity Falls is great. So there isn't gonna probably be any in the E or F tier. So keep that in mind. So yeah, let's get started. Beginning with, of course, where is it? Tourist Trap. Um, let's just get it out of the way. Tourist Trap is, of course, the pilot episode of Gravity Falls. It's gonna be the episode that had a lot to it basically was supposed to be the episode that gets us cemented into who these characters are, gets us understanding who they are, and really get us interested in the show eventually. So it's, by other standards of later episodes of Gravity Falls, it's not like the most stellar or just craziest, but it is an episode that's important to the show and cementing what it's gonna be like. So for that reason, I'll give it A tier. Gobble Wonker, The Legend of the Gobble Wonker. So this is one of those weird episodes where it's just like it's an episode that is different in terms of later episodes of Gravity Falls, in that it has a really different tone to it to what later episodes of the show would be like. So for that reason, and because of the fact that it's just it's a really calm and more like a simplistic episode through the later episodes, which is something I really like, I'll give it a B tier because it's one of the more calmer but fun episodes. After that, we have Headhunters. This is probably like the first three episodes of Gravity Falls, from what I've heard from friends and also from what I feel personally, is that they're a lot different to the later episodes of the show. So for that reason, they're a bit harder to rank, I'd say. But I'd say Headhunters is one of those episodes of Gravity Falls which is just it's fun, but it's also memorable, would I say? It cements the beginning of what eventually would be the whole thing with Stanford and stuff. But it's like your classic murder mystery episode, but Gravity Fallsy, if that makes sense. So for that reason, I think I'll give it a B tier as well. It's a good episode, to be honest. I'll just put it that way. The Hand That Rocks the Mabel. This is the episode, of course, that introduced Gideon, and it's got those funny one-liners like Stan, talking about how he went to prison once in Colombia and stuff like that. And I think it's an alright episode. I wouldn't say it's incredible, but yeah, it's I'd say it's a C tier. So there's that. What's next? You can see this is the first time doing a commentary video like this on this channel. This is not gonna be fun. Oh yeah, The Inconveniencing. This is the beginning of the whole Dipper loving Wendy arc, and oh god, we all know that. This is probably one of those first episodes of Gravity Falls that I saw that really got me interested in the show when I was watching for the first time. And I'll acknowledge that it's one of the it's an episode for its time. Let's just put it that way. And it has a lot of good one-liners, like Stan, it's Stan again, him watching that whole that drama, and you got Mabel and the smile dip and stuff like that. So it's a really simplistic episode in that sense, but it's also important in terms of showcasing a little more of the town and just showing us what Dipper's whole thoughts on Wendy and stuff like that, and the whole arc in there. So I'd say it's a B tier episode. It's a good episode. It's one of those memorable episodes that you always have fun rewatching and stuff like that. But Dipper versus Manuelness. Okay. Right. This is probably my least favorite episode of Gravity Falls. It's one of those episodes that I try to avoid when I'm rewatching them. Now that I've rewatched the show in a while, so but it's I don't know. It's this is one of those episodes that it just feels off. I don't know, even Alex Hurst said in his commentaries on the box set that he wasn't a big fan of this episode. At least he used to not be a big fan of this episode. And I kind of agree with him in that sense. I think anybody who knows me knows that I'm a bit of a staunch defender of Mabel's character, but like this is one of those episodes where you just can't side with her in the sense that they were kind of overly making fun of Dipper in this episode, which it didn't feel right. So I'd say like in that sense I give Dipper vs. Manliness a D tier. It's just like, I mean, like I said, there's no bad episode of Gravity Falls, but this is like not. This is one. If there had to be an episode that's close to being a bad episode, this is probably that one in my opinion. Yeah. Okay, now Double Dipper. This is obviously the episode where I'd say I personally really started getting interested in Gravity Falls a lot. The whole Dipper clones are a really creative and interesting concept, and I think Alex Hirsch even said that like they are his favorite characters in the show, creatures in the show. So, and I loved like it is another like Wendy Dipper arc story, but like it was really fun, and it was also the introduction of some fan favorite characters like Pacifica and like Mabel's friends, and like that's probably why I'd say like I give it an A tier in that sense. Like it was a fun and memorable episode, and definitely one that I always enjoy rewatching whenever I got the chance. Let's see, Irrational Treasure, yeah. I like conspiracy episodes, so this one was definitely a really favorite of mine when I saw it for the first time. I'd say that it was probably one of the more fun episodes of the show at that point. Like, I think like the whole conspiracies and stuff like that were really cool, and this was an episode that obviously was important stuff like Mabel learning like not to be okay with her skin and stuff like that. Not letting people like Pacifica getting on her and telling her she's not worth it or something like that. So like it was nice in terms of Mabel embracing the silliness and stuff like that, and I thought that was a pretty good message in terms of like episode delivery. Also, I like the fact that like because Dipper didn't have anything to learn in this episode, he was able to nonchalantly give revenge, like ruin Pacifica's life by telling her that her parents and like her family wasn't the founders of the town and stuff. So like that was funny, and definitely for that reason I give it an A tier. Time Traveler's Pig. Yes, this is, hand on heart, my favorite episode of Gravity Falls. Like, this is the episode that really just made me go from being like, this is a good show to, yes, this is the best show ever. And, like, I just love Time Traveler's Pig. Like, I love time travel episodes, and this was definitely one of those episodes where I was just like, yes, this is a lot of fun. Like, I definitely really enjoyed the whole aspect of, them going back in time and all that stuff, and, like, yeah, it's another Dipper Wendy episode, and that's the motivation behind Dipper messing with time, but, like, it doesn't matter. Like, for me, this is a good episode, because, like, it's the introduction of Waddles, and, like, the whole, like, them going back in time, like, that stuff is a lot of fun, and it doesn't get old, so, like, I've rewatched this episode probably, like, a trillion times, and I still have fun watching it. Like, I was rewatching it last night, just before, making this tier list, so, for that reason, it is the first S tier episode on this list, so, no doubt about that. Best episode ever. Now, Fight Fighters. Now, let's just put this. I'll be frank. I'm not really a gamer, or play that many video games and stuff like that. So, like, I think for the video game sense of this episode, I didn't feel it as much. But like, I understood pretty much all the references. Like, I mean, who doesn't know what Donkey Kong or Pac-Man or stuff like that are? But like, yeah, like video game wise, it was a really fun episode, and I also thought Rumble was a pretty cool character, and just like there's so many video game references in it. Like, shit, man, this was a good episode. So I'd say like in that sense, then I'd probably give it a B tier, because like it was another Wendy Dipper episode, and at this point I was getting a bit tired of those. But like, yeah, it was a good episode. Like, it's definitely one of those episodes that you'd enjoy. I think it's an episode that I've come to like a lot more ever since I first watched the show. So there's that. Little Dipper. Oh boy. This is one of those more, I'd say, like, fun, but also kind of forgettable episodes, because, like, this was the episode, I'd say, like, people who try to say that, like, oh, Mabel was wrong for, making fun of Dipper being shorter than her, kind of failed to acknowledge the fact that, like, the way Alex Hirsch set up Dipper and Mabel was that, Dipper is smarter academically than Mabel, but Mabel is more sociable than Dipper, and both of the twins are jealous of that aspect of each other. And like, for Mabel, like, seeing Dipper being smarter than her in these situations kind of made her feel a bit not as worth it, if that makes sense. So like, for her, the moment like Dipper she finds something about her that's better than Dipper, she takes advantage of it, because like sort of like Dipper was making fun of her and stuff like that. So I don't get like why fans are so like downwards in terms of like hating on Mabel for this episode. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that I don't agree with the Gravity Falls fandom in those aspects, but this is definitely one of those episodes where I liked it, and I think that like excluding the fandom opinion because because like I'm not gonna let that affect my opinions on these episodes. It was one of those episodes that I definitely enjoyed watching, and I would say like it's not a horrible episode. I mean, like I said, there's no bad episodes of Gravity Falls, but like it's one of the lesser like episodes that I don't really pay much attention to. If that makes sense. So I'd say I give it an C tier because like yeah, I mean it's not the worst episode of the show, but it's definitely one of those episodes where I take it or leave it if that makes sense. Okay, what's next? Summerween. Yes, Summerween. I mean, how many other shows have an entire cult following in the sense that like they have people cutting jackal melons on June 2nd, 22nd every year? Like even now, how many almost 10 years since Gravity Falls came out, like people are still like cutting like melons and stuff. Okay, what am I talking about? Okay, anyway, so this episode is definitely one of the more interesting episodes of Gravity Falls in the sense that like a Halloween themed episode, and on top of that, I also really like the whole aspect of like Dipper and Mabel's differing views, because this is like probably the echo of what would come later on in the show. Like how Dipper wants to grow up too fast while Mabel doesn't want to grow up that much, and like this episode definitely cemented that whole aspect. And I mean, you could ignore the whole Dipper again being obsessed with Wendy in this episode aspect, and like being his reasoning, because like overall this episode definitely took the cake in terms of being interesting in that sense, because Halloween episodes, who hates Halloween episodes, let's be honest. I'd say this is a B tier episode because it was definitely a memorable episode, and I also love the Stan B plot. Like, come on, him scaring those kids, like, who wouldn't love that? Okay, Boss Mabel. Again, this is I sort of have the same views on this that I have in terms of why I gave Little Dipper a C tier, in the sense that like I'm also gonna give this a C tier episode. But like, Boss Mabel is one of those episodes where like, yeah, it was a good episode. Like, I definitely enjoy watching it. I think it's definitely a good episode. But like, I think it was also an episode of Gravity Falls that I thought was like, I don't know. It's a good episode. Like, what am I trying to say? Like, it was an episode that I enjoyed, but it was also an episode that I think you could take or leave it. I think that Stan's whole plot with him, like, cash money and, like, not giving money to charity, that was hilarious, and definitely another one of those good, like, top 10, like, classic Stan moments. But, like, I think, like, the whole Mabel being a boss thing was a pretty cool concept that might have been done better if it was, taking a different approach. But, yeah, I give it a C tier. Maybe actually a B tier. I mean, I like the episode. Let's just put it that way. Okay, the Bottomless Pit. This is probably a test of how well I still remember these episodes. The Bottomless Pit is it's kind of an ironic episode according to what like Alex said in the box set, because like it was like a mid-season episode that they were trying to cut on like save on money by making it like take place in a bottomless pit, so they didn't have to animate backgrounds. And ironically, ended up being the opposite because they had 3 beautifully animated stories, so like they had to have backgrounds for them, and it was probably more expensive in that sense. I like the Bottomless Pit in terms of like the story aspect. Like the stories that the episode provided were pretty interesting and fun to watch, and I definitely enjoyed them. And I think that makes this episode definitely a memorable one. But I also kind of think that at this point fans were probably starting to get bored of the whole non-story type aspect and wanted to see more mysteries. So this was probably one of the episodes where it's just like, yeah, I don't oppose its existence, but I can also see why fans may not be too interested in this episode. So for that reason, I'm gonna give it a C tier as well. Okay, the Deep End. Oh my gosh, this is probably the epitome peak of Dipper and Wendy episodes. I still don't understand why fans hate on Mabel for this episode, because like, let's think about this for a second. Dipper faked being a lifeguard for this episode just because he was simping over Wendy. Like, think about this. Who on earth hires a 12-year-old to be a lifeguard? Like, who would actually approve of that? Like, I can understand why fans might disagree on episodes like, I don't know, sock opera, for example, where like Dipper finds like remembering all the times like Mabel, he had to sacrifice for Mabel. But like this episode is like why like Mabel was definitely in the right in this episode because like she was trying to help Mermando and stuff. But like the only reason Dipper was even so caring about his job was because like if he gets fired, he want to be able to hang out with Wendy. Like let's take a moment to acknowledge that. Like let's just get that out of the way. Like there is no place. Like why would you hire a 12-year-old to be a lifeguard? Like I think I read it somewhere like in the state of Oregon, like the legal age is to be a lifeguard is 15. So like unless okay, let's be honest, like Gravity Falls isn't a show that like you should like let's take the moment like like you shouldn't accept like everything to be realistic and similar because like I mean like in Dreamscapers like Gideon gets the deed to the shack, and that certainly makes him the owner. Like that's not how deeds work. And in the same sense here, it's like yeah, okay, like we could excuse that, but like still, it's just like we all know why Dipper wanted to be a lifeguard. It wasn't because he wanted to be saving lives or stuff like that, or being competent. Like he was abusing his power the whole episode, man. Like he was like messing with the pool guests and stuff like that with Wendy. Like let's be honest. Like shut up. Like if you're still hating on Mabel for this episode, like Dipper was the wrong one in this whole episode. Like oh my god, sometimes I hate this fandom. But like yeah, anyways, so for that reason, like that and the fact that like the episode was kind of forgettable, I kind of have to give this episode a D tier. I mean, it's not a horrible episode, but it's one of those episodes where like I could take it or leave it. And like the whole fandom argument just kind of made me tired as fuck about watching this episode. So there's that. Okay, Carpe Diem. Some people like body swap episodes, some people don't like body swap episodes. I'm sort of in the middle. Like, I thought this episode for a body swap was good. I mean, like, I wasn't a big fan of the Owl House body swap episode, but like, Gravity Falls did a good body swap episode, and I thought it was alright. And the whole aspect and the whole explanation about why Dipper wanted the room was pretty wholesome. And I thought the way it was handled was good, so for that reason, I'd probably give it a C tier. I mean, it was the episode that introduced us to what eventually would be Ford's room, so I thought that was a good episode in that sense. So for that reason, I probably will acknowledge it as being an okay episode, but I wouldn't say that it's like the greatest episode either. So there's that. What's next? That was episode 16. Oh yes, Boys Crazy. Okay. Again, this is another one of those peak Dipper simping Wendy episodes, but also Mabel simping episodes, because like both, like Alex even said in his like commentaries, like both twins were in the wrong in this episode. This was the episode that showcased both twins at their worst, and I kind of agree with him in that sense, because like both Mabel and Dipper did some pretty scummy things in this episode. Like Mabel, holding an entire boy band hostage, while Dipper completely interfered and ruined Wendy and Robbie's relationship. Because like, okay, let's be frank, like even if you don't agree with Robbie and Wendy being a thing, like they were dating. Like Dipper literally came in between them and ruined their relationship. And let's be frank, I don't give a fuck about relationships in shows, but like that was pretty scummy of Dipper. Let's just be honest. Like Dipper wasn't really a likable character in this episode, in the same way that Mabel wasn't. And like, even as someone who's defensive of Mabel's character, I can acknowledge that. Both twins were just not the best in this episode, and it was also an episode that I think a lot of people dislike as well, for various reasons. I think the visuals, like at the end with the sunset, was pretty cool. Sunrise was really cool, but like, and like Stan was also a pretty funny character in this episode, but like his involvement in helping Dipper ruin the relationship was probably a bit unlikable. But like overall, I think this was a good episode. It was not a good episode, but like it wasn't a horror. Like again, I'd probably say this is probably the closest to being an F tier episode, but I'll leave it in D tier. I thought it was an okay episode. Okay, Land Before Swine. This is another one of those fun episodes that I really liked. I'd say that I'd probably give it a B tier, because I thought it was a fun episode and I thought it was really clever, but at the same time, I kind of didn't dig it as much as, what am I trying to say? I thought it was a fun episode in terms of showcasing various aspects of both of Mabel and Stan's relationship, but like I don't know. I know what I'm trying to explain here. It was a good episode. Let's just put it that way. I thought it was all right. Or did I think it was all right? I don't know. It's been. I don't know. It's like. Okay, let's just move on. Okay, Dreamscapers. Yeah, this is definitely probably. I think this is the episode that everybody was probably waiting for it to come, and like this is definitely probably the most hyped and just talked about and beloved episodes of season one of Gravity Falls, because this is the introduction of Bill Cipher and all the shit that he ends up doing, and like this is all begins with this episode. And like it's one of those episodes that like no matter what kind of Gravity Falls fan you are, you can acknowledge this episode and enjoy it. And for that reason, I'm gonna have to give it an A tier, because obviously if I didn't give it anything else, you'll probably rip me apart. But like, even I enjoyed this episode, and I can acknowledge that. And I think my only complaint was like those two, like what were those two guys' names? The ones that Bill thought of, and Mabel's dream guys. Like, like from the commentaries, Alex and his team, like they kind of enjoyed them, but I had to disagree with them. I thought they were pretty annoying characters. But excluding those two, I'd say the overall episode was great, and this episode also changed my opinion on Stan, because like at that point I thought Stan was like kind of a crummy old guy, but like this episode and him like us seeing that his toughness on Dipper was because of the fact that he didn't want Dipper to end up like him, sort of how he was as a kid. Like that was a wholesome moment, and definitely probably one of the most fun aspects of this episode. And like just sweet aspects. It's probably one of the underlooked moments because of Bill in it, but like I definitely enjoyed that about it. Gideon Rises. Again, this is a definite eight. No, I think I give it an S tier. Yeah, this is definitely probably the best episode of one of the best episodes of season one. I really enjoyed the whole build up to this aspect, to this point of the episode, and the ultimate reveal of the portal. Like I think everybody can agree on that aspect. Like this was an important episode, and this was an episode that definitely had a lot of stakes. Like if Tourist Trap was important in getting everybody excited for Gravity Falls, Gideon Rises was important in getting everybody excited for what was going to happen next, because at the time, I think Alex said like he didn't know what was going to happen next entirely, but like this was the episode that sort of cemented that if there was going to be a season 2, there was a story that was going to happen, because I think when he said like he wasn't sure if there was going to be a second season at the time, but like this episode definitely made sure that happened. And yeah, it was definitely a good episode. And I mean, I probably should have wrote a script before I started this. Okay, anyways, on to season 2. Alright, so with season 2, of course, we gotta start with the first episode of season 2, which is, of course, Karaoke. Karaoke it's definitely the episode that had to introduce Gravity Falls back after like a year-long hiatus, so definitely it had its ups and its downs, and I definitely think that in terms of introductory, it was a good episode. It also was crucial, acknowledging that Stan knows about the town in terms of, telling it to Dipper and Mabel and, like, all its weirdness, so in that sense, I thought it was a good episode, and I also agree that it's definitely one of the episodes of Gravity Falls that I genuinely enjoy watching whenever I get the chance. So in that sense, I probably have to give it an A tier. It was a good episode. What's next? Where is it? Into the Bunker. Oh my god, finally, the end of the Dipper and Wendy arc. Well, at least it sort of was. This episode was, excluding that whole mess, it was a really good episode, and I definitely really enjoyed the whole finally delving into the author and who he could have been, and the whole like going into the bunker and that aspect. And like it was definitely a different location. It was definitely a lot more eerie of an episode, and also had some of the most like messed up moments with that whole shifter and stuff. So it was definitely a fun episode to watch, and one that I definitely will give another A tier to. Like I think a lot of Gravity Falls season 2 episodes are gonna be in this tier list, in this tier, so probably get ready for that. The Gulf War. I'd say this was a C tier episode because like it was sort of a little light-hearted episode compared to the last two. It, I don't know. Those, what are they called? The little Putchians or something? Like those guys. Like I thought they were iffy character, like meh, like weird creatures. And I also thought like I think like this episode's big point was like the change of heart in Pacifica's character, and also kind of acknowledging to us that part of her, the reason why she's the way she is because her parents are pieces of shit. But like in that sense, this is definitely a episode that definitely changed Pacifica's character, but I wouldn't say it's hugely necessarily important to the overall show. So in that sense, I'd give it a C tier. Sock opera. Oh god, sock opera. Where do you start with sock opera? This is the return of Bill, the probably for its time the biggest episode of Gravity Falls, the episode that definitely got a lot of people talking, and I think Bipper's probably the most drawn fan art character that there's probably ever been. So like definitely an episode that changed a lot about the show. It also is the episode that really started to, I think, probably drive home the whole Mabel aspect and the situation in her character, which kind of sucks because, this is sort of like the episode where people constantly like, oh my god, that's so annoying. But like, this is the episode that constantly gets thrown around as the start of that whole problem. But like, I definitely say it's one of the more likable episodes in that sense with Bill in it, and I definitely have to put it in an A tier because, I mean, again, this is another one of the situations where if I put it anywhere lower, people would, ruin my life. But like, but yeah, like, it's definitely a good episode. I really genuinely enjoyed it. And yeah, Susan the Real Girl. This is another one of those episodes that people sort of like take it or leave it. I thought it was nice in terms of like giving us more acknowledgement in Seuss's character and like what he's up and what he's like, and like showing like Seuss in a light beyond just being an employee at the Mystery Shack. And it definitely like also had a lot of again video game type anime references, which again like I am not a fan of either, but like I definitely enjoyed. It is also the episode that a lot of people say was Alex, predicting Five Nights at Freddy and what's it, Doki Doki Literature Club, whatever that game, whatever the fuck that is. Like beforehand, like, I don't know. Like, I think one of my favorite aspects about this episode, if you go back and look at it, is like two minor characters in the background were like children that Alex got to meet because of the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and like they were put into the show as like minor characters, and I thought that was pretty wholesome. Like this episode has a little bit of a nice wholesome background to it, which is a lot of fun to anybody who thinks about it, who goes and is interested in that. But like beyond that, I think like I give it a B tier. It was an alright episode. I thought it was nice in terms of like giving Seuss more attention, but like beyond that, I don't know. I thought it was an okay episode. Little Gift Shop of Horror. This is like the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episode, basically. I think like as Halloween episodes go, this is probably the weaker of the two Halloween episodes that Gravity Falls had. Like Summer Moon was a good episode, but like this was meh, I guess. I think a lot of people disliked this episode because again it was in the middle of season 2. Things are getting crazy, and now we suddenly have a less significant episode that isn't even canon technically. Like all 3 stories that happen in the episode aren't even considered like actual events that happened in the show. It was just stories that Stan came up with. So I think I give it a C tier in that sense. I mean, I wouldn't say it's the worst episode of Gravity Falls, but I wouldn't say it's also the best episode of Gravity Falls in that sense. It's another take it or leave it type story. Society of the Blind Eye. Okay, now this is the episode that definitely changed McGucket's character forever. Like at this point, he was still considered like a crazy old man that like was just like the local town nut job. But like this was the episode that definitely made him go from being like like the crazy character to being the character with a bit of interest lore, because at this point we find out that he was in collaboration with the author of the journals. So that was a definite shock, and I remember watching for the first time. I was like, what the heck? And I think this was also a good episode in the sense that like it had a lot of emotions in it, because like we find out why McGucket is the way he is because of what he did to himself, and it kind of shows that whatever this author was up to, like it was kind of messed up what he discovered. So definitely something to leave a lot of questions to be considered that we ultimately will learn later on. Also, this was the episode that completely made the McGucket hoax happen, like opened the door on the McGucket hoax, because that whole leaked image of McGucket writing the journals. Up until this point, there were probably a lot of people who actually still believed that. But this is the episode that ultimately revealed that that was a whole elaborate leak by Alex to get people off the trail. And I thought that was still. I think that's probably one of the greatest things about Gravity Falls. Like this, like they didn't need to do that, but they did it because they knew how fans were, and like if they didn't, like it would have resulted in things being uncovered a lot sooner than they would have. So that was pretty cool. Blendin's Game. This was another one of those really intense and insane episodes, and I definitely really enjoyed it for that reason. I thought it was a pretty cool episode in the sense that like it really changed Blendin's character in the sense like at this point I think people kind of sort of forgot about him at this point, and suddenly we were back to seeing what he's up to, and he's still in prison and how much of a grudge he has against Dipper and Mabel, and that was definitely a really amazing and interesting plot, and I definitely consider this probably one of the best episodes of Gravity Falls, because alongside that we also have the whole Seuss plot, and like I was finding out like Seuss's episode, why Seuss hates his birthday, and the emotional side of why that is the case, and him realizing that he doesn't need his dad in terms of that sense because he has other people who he acknowledges as family. Like this is a really emotional episode, man. Like I think this is another episode that really just made Seuss out to be a much better character than. Well, actually, no. Always Seuss was always a good character. Let's just put it that way. But this is an episode that definitely gave him a deeper lore and made him just an even better character than he already was. If that makes sense. Kind of wish they did something similar with Wendy. Okay, the Love God. Okay, this is another one of those episodes that people definitely have gripes with. Sometimes a lot of it has to do with like Mabel forcing romance and stuff, but like this, I'd probably argue that the same people who argue that Mabel forced Robbie and his relationships and stuff are the same people who probably ignore that Dipper ruined Robbie's relationship with Wendy in Boys Crazy. Like come on, like both characters, like in that sense Mabel probably was doing a lot better in that sense, but like at the same time we gotta acknowledge that forcing love on someone is probably not a good thing, just as forcing someone to break up with someone because you don't like them being there dating that person is also not good. Dipper stands. This was definitely an episode that was alright, but it was like that whole story just kind of made it a bit. This is also the episode that had a lot of controversy with the whole Alex wanting to have that lesbian couple in it, but like Disney wouldn't let him do it, so that is also has a lot of people salty about this episode. And that was pretty, that just sucked really, because that would have been really nice to see. Other than that, this episode is also home to probably the single greatest scene in Gravity Falls history, with that hot air balloon coming out of the sky, falling like the Hindenburg. Like that was probably like the most epic scene ever. And like, have you seen the animatic for that, with like Alex like voicing the characters and like the Duel of the Fates in the background? Like that was probably the most intense and most hilarious thing ever. Like, just for that simple reason of that hot air balloon, I'm gonna give this episode a C tier, because that whole scene made this episode a million times better than what it probably was gonna end up being. Okay, Northwest Mansion Mystery. Um, this is the episode that, like in the sense that Society of the Blind Eye changed Magaga's character forever. This episode changed Pacifica's character forever because suddenly Pacifica went from being a hateful character to a likable character, or to some people, a tolerable character. This is also the episode that began the whole Dipper liking Pacifica thing, which I'm not against it. And then that sense, like, this was a good episode in that sense. Like, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. It was nice. I like episodes that have like a mansion mystery type feel to it. I don't know why. I've never read a single Sherlock Holmes book, but I really enjoyed this episode. It was definitely an A tier, I'd say. Not what he seems. Do I even need to mention where this episode is gonna be? It's obviously a D tier. Just kidding. This episode is the best single best Gravity Falls episode ever. There is no argument about that. I think we can all agree on that. This is the best episode of Gravity Falls. Period. That's an S tier. Moving on. A Tale of Two Stands. I think this was up until Weird McGinn the longest episode of Gravity Falls because it was 24 minutes. This episode definitely was a shocker. I think at this point there were a lot of people theorizing that Stan, Ford, and McGucket all lived in Gravity Falls and that whole mystery trio theory, which I really wish was canon, but because I really like that theory. But yeah, I thought it was still a good episode in that sense. It definitely had a lot of interesting aspects. It really showcased just what Stan and Ford's relationship was like, how it fell apart, and it was also the episode that really kind of made you worried about what was going to happen to Dipper and Mabel, especially at the end when Mabel's just laying awake in bed and wondering what's going to happen to her because Dipper wouldn't realize that. Yeah, this is an emotional episode in that sense, and also in terms of just how messed up Stan and Ford's relationship has become, and like a lot of people like Stanford because he's an interesting character and stuff, but I'm really iffy on his character still, and this episode definitely didn't give me any good perceptions of Ford. And later on, I mean, he is, I think, a better character now than later on in the show than he was portrayed in this episode. But I don't know. Ford was an interesting character overall in the show, and this is definitely an episode that began that whole opinion about him for me. But overall, I really love this episode. It's definitely one of the best episodes of Gravity Falls, and thus I give it an A tier. Dungeons, and more dungeons. Any episode with Weird Al is an immediate A tier, but at the same time, I also love that this episode had, it definitely began the whole Dipper and Mabel's collapsing relationship aspect with, Dipper not telling Mabel about the rift thing, which still is something that I get really mad about Gravity Falls fans accusing her of doing in terms of Weird McGinn, but this was definitely the episode that began the whole aspect of that issue, and definitely one episode of the show that I am overall 50-50 on. The whole remainder of the episode was really great. I don't play Dungeons and Dragons or whatever that was. I don't know anything about that game, but this was definitely a fun episode, and that's in regards of Ford and Dipper bonding. It definitely was wholesome, and also the Stan and Mabel bonding type deal. But I think overall this episode was a good episode in terms of giving Ford more depth, and definitely made him a likable character in that sense. But I don't know, it's probably a take it or leave it episode again as well. But Weird Al is the reason it's an A tier. Stanchurian Candidate. Politics, man. Again, I give this episode a B tier because I thought the whole political jokes and stuff were pretty funny, actually, to be honest. I'm kind of that person, but excluding the politics of this episode, and the whole weirdness of the political episode, having a political episode and stuff like that. I thought this was a great episode in the sense that it gave Stan a little bit more in depth, but I also kind of disliked the fact that it didn't give us more Stanford, because I think at this point people wanted to learn more about Ford, what he was up to, and then throwing an election episode in I'm not against that being the case, but I kind of wish that the show gave us more of Ford in this episode. Because, like, I think that if Ford was developed a lot more, I would have liked his character a lot more than I do right now. So this episode could have been a lot better, and it sucks that that wasn't the case. But I still enjoy it, and it's definitely one of the more interesting episodes, especially given it was the return of Gideon and his whole situation, so that was cool. The Last Mabel Corn. Again, I'm gonna have to give this episode a well, it's like an A tier, I'd say. Yeah, I the whole unicorn aspect of the episode, where like, what is her name, Celesta Beta Bell? Yeah, like I thought she was the most horrible character ever. Like, and like the whole aspect of her, you know, being a piece of shit to Mabel was honestly horrible. But like, this is also an episode I think people kind of fail to realize that this unicorn is being a dick to Mabel, and like that should not be taken as a fact. The unicorn didn't know shit about her, so I don't know. Like, this episode kind of, like, what am I supposed to say about that unicorn? Okay, let's ignore the unicorn and move over to the Dipper and Ford B plot. I thought that was an interesting plot in the sense that, like, you know, we finally learned like what on earth Ford and Bill's connection is, because that was a shocker. Like, Bill helping Ford helping Bill, like, and why they're the way they are. So that was a definite shock, and definitely something I didn't see coming. And yeah, like, this wasn't like I forgot to mention this in Dipper in the Tale 2 Stands thing, but like, you know, the whole episode, like us learning in that episode why McGucket went insane because he was helping Ford, and like him going through the portal by accident. And this episode we learn why the portal even exists and stuff, and why Ford was so paranoid and why he trusts no one. Like, this was a deep episode in that sense of, like, it developed a lot of the lore that was building up at this point to the eventual end of the show. So I definitely like that aspect about this episode. Okay, roadside attraction. Okay, a lot of you people are gonna disagree with me on this because I don't personally hate roadside attraction that much. What? I mean, I get why it's such a despised episode of Gravity Falls, because it aired in the middle of two really important episodes. It was towards the end of the series, and people just wanted to learn what was going to happen next. The whole weirdness of Stan taking the kids out on a road trip after they build-proofed the shack, even though, like, Ford, it was mentioned in Journal 3 that Ford was the one who wanted Stan to go on this whole road trip. And, like, overall, this was an episode that, like, just didn't make any sense in that sense, but what I really loved about it was the whole, like, this is the last episode of Gravity Falls that was normal in that sense. Like, after this, everything went insane. Like, we're Mageddon and, like, you know, versus the future. Like, this was the last, like, episode of Gravity Falls that was anywhere similar to, it was close to being similar to all the other episodes. And also, I'm a sucker for road trip episodes, so that's why I like it. And the whole, it was like the first episode of Gravity Falls that actually went outside of Gravity Falls and explored the greater state of Oregon, which is probably one of my favorite states in the US. So, like, I really enjoyed this episode, and if you do a little bit more research into the background of this episode, a lot of the locations that the characters went to were actually based off real roadside attractions that the Gravity Falls crew visited during a road trip they went on in 2013 in between the hiatus for season 1 and 2, so that was pretty cool. Of course, I know that if I gave this episode an S tier, people are gonna be mad, and I mean, I don't regard this episode as an S tier, I don't even see it as an A tier. So I'm gonna give it a comfortable B tier, even though I'm pretty sure everybody wants me to put in an F. But for me, it's not a horrible episode. I definitely agree that it could have been better, and if this was replaced with an episode that focused more on Ford, I would be totally for it. But I don't hate this episode. It's definitely not an episode that I despise. So for that reason, and for that reason alone, I'm probably going to give it a B tier. Because I just don't hate it, but I also agree why people hate it as well. So, okay, final four. Dipper and Mabel versus the future. This is probably the most emotional episode of Gravity Falls up until this point. This is also probably the episode with the most misunderstood moment in Gravity Falls, with, like, fans saying that Mabel was in the wrong for the way she was acting towards Dipper and stuff, but like I disagree. Like Mabel was broken in this episode. Like she had just been told that her best friends weren't going to be coming to her birthday party and were not going to be there to say goodbye to her. Her perceptions of high school had just been flipped upside down, and now she had been told that Dipper wasn't going to be coming home with her. So obviously she was going to be in an emotional wreck in this episode, and like if you look on the mental side of the situation, I can understand why Mabel was so broken and just didn't want to listen to Dipper. Dipper in this situation should have listened to Mabel, talked to her, and asked her why she was so heartbroken, rather than try to give her reasons why things could be better. And like his failure to do so definitely resulted in things just not being well situated in terms of both of them, and that definitely caused a lot of internal just like problems. And I definitely feel like had that aspect been handled better, like probably fans probably wouldn't hate on Mabel that much. And like the whole rift thing, like come on, like we all know like Mabel would never give the rift to Bill if she knew that it was Bill or what the rift did. The fact that she gave the rift to Bill was all based on the fact that she didn't know what it was and she was broken. So, quite frankly, I believe that if Dipper had told Mabel what the rift did and that stuff, like, she would never have given the rift to Bill. So, I kind of feel like fans give Mabel a lot more BS than she deserves for this scene, and not enough to Dipper. And like, I don't want to try and be like, oh, Dipper bad, Mabel good, because like that's incorrect. I think that both twins definitely made mistakes in this episode that definitely resulted in what eventually happened with Weirdmageddon. But like, both twins should have, but like in that sense, Dipper should have been like more open and listening to Mabel than what he ended up doing, and that could have prevented what ended up happening. Like, this was an emotional episode in that sense because like it just was the culmination of everything that was building up to this point and the collapse of the relationship, and that definitely needs to be acknowledged in the sense that like this was where things fell apart where, and this was everything that Mabel was afraid of was going to happen to them happened. So it was definitely an impactful episode emotional wise, and for that reason I have to give it an S tier. It is probably its emotions and just what happened in this episode was heartbreaking, and excluding the fandom's BS about how they treat Mabel for this episode, I still really love it. Weirdmageddon Part 1. This is the beginning of the end. This was the episode where Weirdmageddon really began to occur, and this is the episode where, like, finally, this is an episode where, like, Dipper is actually talking to Wendy in the sense that, like, not romantic interest, but, like, I definitely enjoyed Weirdmageddon Part 1 in the sense that, like, it definitely gave us an atmosphere of what a Bill-controlled apocalypse is going to be like. It was definitely an episode that truly raised the stakes, and I think Dipper's whole speech to Gideon at the end about him, like, not being not trying to force love on someone instead being someone that it can be loved was definitely probably a really impactful moment and probably one of the most quoted lines from Gravity Falls, probably one of the best quotes ever. So for that reason I have to give it a solid A tier. It was definitely a good episode. Okay, Weirdmageddon Part 2, Escape from Reality. I think a lot of fans sort of a little bit more harsher on this episode than they should be because this was the episode that showcased to us what Mabel was going through and her denial of the fact that things were going to change and that like growing up is something that you have to be ready for. And I think that's an issue that I think a lot of people face in their lives, and definitely is something that the show did a good job in showcasing, but like people just didn't want to accept, or maybe like that, like I can get why people are kind of pissed at Mabel for this episode, especially because that like Dippy Fresh, because like I think unless you're the mystery of GF and making and him I probably unironically liking him, everybody hates Dippy Fresh. Like nobody likes that little piece of shit, and this is definitely an episode that showcased that firsthand. Like everybody. I can get why people dislike Mabel for that scene, but like overall, like we're seeing in this episode Mabel in denial of what's going on, and that she is a lot more broken than the than we're, we're letting ourselves see. And this episode definitely was impactful in the sense that like Dipper, realizing that okay, like Mabel doesn't want to grow up, but at the same time I'm growing up too quickly. Because like both twins have this flaw, like I mentioned, it's like Dipper wants to grow up too fast, but Mabel doesn't, and both twins need each other in order to realize that. So like Dipper, without Dipper to be there in her life, Mabel would probably never grow up. And if Mabel wasn't in Dipper's life, then he would probably be an accountant already, or I don't know, whatever. And like both both viewpoints on life are flawed. Like if you're a kid, like you should be a kid, like enjoy your childhood, because I think like I think it's like that case is like when you're a kid, like you want to grow up, but then once you're an adult that you just kind of wish you could be a kid again. And this is sort of like the epitome and like showcase of that aspect in its full force, because you have two characters who have both of those viewpoints. One wants to be a kid while the other one doesn't. And well, that is a one-dimensional viewpoint on Dipper and Mabel, because Alex has said that like Mabel is a lot smarter than she lets herself than we see her as, and Dipper is not as smart as we want to call him. But basically because of that, like both twins are important. Both twins have that whole aspect of them that should be acknowledged in that sense. And I think Dipper and Mabel definitely, in this whole aspect, are characters that had a lot more to give. And what is it? Like basically like Dipper and Mabel's whole mentality and the way they act is reflective of those two viewpoints on life. And ultimately the way they resolve it is one of my favorites. Like the way, like at the end, like Dipper, and I think a lot of fans probably don't understand that like Dipper not taking Ford's apprenticeship is not a bad thing, but him realizing that he is growing up too fast and he shouldn't be doing that. In the sense that like him telling Mabel that things are gonna be okay is Mabel realizing that yeah, growing up is a part of life, and I should be ready for that and embrace it rather than try to be in denial of that. So both twins learned a valuable lesson in this episode, and that should be acknowledged, and is why I think it's an important episode in that sense. It mended both twins' relationships and also allowed them to face each other's flawed viewpoints on the future. And yeah, I mean, it's not the best Weird Mageddon episode for the other reasons, but like that was a really good aspect, and for that reason, I'm gonna give it a B tier. It was a good episode. I mean, overall story wise, it was probably not the greatest, but it was definitely in terms of impactfulness an important episode, and definitely one that had to be acknowledged. All right, finally, Weird Mageddon 3, Take Back the Falls, and if you split it up, Weird Mageddon Part 4, Somewhere in the Woods. Do we even need to explain what this episode's impactfulness is? It's an immediate S tier. This was the last episode of Gravity Falls. This was the episode that we had to say goodbye to all these characters. This was the episode that it needed to be the best it could be, and it was the best it could be. It's been 5 years since this episode came out, and it is still probably the most impactful and emotional episode from a show that I've ever seen. It was an emotional episode, man. And like the whole build up and like the fighting with Bill and stuff, it's important. And this is the episode that I also feel like this is why I don't agree with fans who want a season 3, or fans who think that Bill Cipher is gonna be alive and he needs to come back, because like if you do either of those things, you take away from the impact of this finale and the importance of its ending. Like Gravity Falls was a show about childhood. It was a show that showcased that childhood ends, and it's a fact about life that we have to be ready for, because like real life comes up to you really quickly, and if you're not ready for it, then it's gonna hit you like a truck. And the important aspect of Gravity Falls was that it was not just a show about mystery. It was a show about characters. It was a show about what life at that age is like. That age where you're no longer a kid and you're getting into your teenage years and adulthood and realizing what life is really like, and that not everything is going to go your way, and that not every time, there will be times in your life where you're going to run into people that don't agree with you or don't look at the world in the same way you do. And the importance of that whole aspect was that you need to be ready for that. And the importance of Gravity Falls at the end of the day is that it is a show that understood that fact and showcased it in a really important way that I think not a lot of people still acknowledge. Gravity Falls ending was part of why it's such a good show and still is so widely loved and remembered, because it ended when it needed to end. And by making more of it or bringing back a character that definitively is dead would take away from that impactfulness, and I just don't feel like that would be a good thing to do to Gravity Falls. Like, this show is good because of what happens in the end of it. And Weirdmageddon 3, there are aspects of Weirdmageddon 3 that I think people don't like Stan getting his memory back faster than he probably should have, even though, that kind of was retcon in the journal. But excluding that aspect, it was still a good episode, and it had the impactful emotional moment in it. This was the episode that fixed Stan and Ford's relationship, allowed Ford to finally reconcile his mistakes with McGucket and Bill, allow him to ultimately realize that what he was trying to attain in life was not what he should have been trying to do. And it also allowed both twins to, realize that life is not gonna be what they always hoped it was gonna be, but that as long as they have each other, they are gonna make it. And Gravity Falls is a show that really was for that moment. Everything built up to that ending where the twins get on that bus and go home, because that whole summer, when they arrived there, they both really didn't want to be there, but by the end of it, they didn't want to go. And that is a showcase of just what this show did. It's the same way as us. When we came into Gravity Falls in that first episode, we didn't know what we were getting ourselves into. But by the end of it, we didn't want to leave. The same way the twins didn't want to, but that is part of life. Time moves on, things end, Gravity Falls ends. We need to move on to new things. And, it's good to not allow that stuff to be forgotten, but it's also important to look at the next chapter. And I guess that is what the ultimate importance of Gravity Falls is. It is a show about understanding that life is an ever moving escalator type thing, I don't know. And what you think about life right now may not be what you'll think about it in 10 years. The person you are now may not be the person you are going to end up being in the future. And that is what Gravity Falls' ultimate, I think, important message is. It's life. Life is life, and you need to be ready for that. And that is ultimately the importance of the final episode of Gravity Falls.